So what we're going to talk about today is how to choose the right plant, why it's important, and how to actually plant them correctly and maintain them so that they'll retain the ability to stay healthy and beautiful for a long time. Okay, so you've seen this kind of thing. Look at that's a dogwood. I'll bet a lot of you who have dogwoods have seen that happen to the dogwood leaves. Those are sunburned leaves. Same thing with hostas. Neither of these plants were planted in the right place. And how about this? It probably looked really nice about 30 years ago when they first planted these cute little plants, but they aren't so cute anymore. And this was a big oops. If you plant a tree too close to anything, it will just eat it right up. It'll just make it part of itself. And I'm sure Art remembers this one. This is another example of planting the wrong plant in the wrong place. This fellow here wanted to have his arborvitae as a screen between his house and his neighbor's house because they're so close. And so he planted them like that, and they were pretty good for a while. And now he contacted us because when he looks out his window now, all the branches are dead. And that's because there's no sunlight getting in there. And the plant was not planted in a good place. He would have been a lot better off just putting up a fence, at least in this case. So, do your homework before you buy the tree. You want to match the right tree to the right place in your landscape. And I can't tell you how many times, I would say 90% of the problems we see in trees at the Plant and Insect Clinic, trees and all plants, but trees and shrubs in particular, because you can't easily dig them up like you can a perennial, they are not planted in the right place. And when you don't, it's kind of like us. If we don't get dressed when we go outside and it's cold, we're going to lower our vulnerability to diseases. And the same thing happens with plants, and if we don't eat right. Same thing happens to plants that just really aren't planted where they're supposed to be. They're going to end up with fungal diseases and insect diseases. And worse yet, they're going to end up with drought problems killing the roots. So the first thing you need to do is figure out how much light you need. What kind of soil drainage do you have? Do you have pests? So I'm going to go back. Okay, so let's go to the light. First of all, if you look at the tag that comes with the plant, and I'll tell you, we went down to Portland Nursery, and they have this kind of tags on all their plants, but they also have one that's a white one that they put on there. And what they told us is, don't look at the plant tag, look at our tag, because our tag is telling the truth. Almost all of these trees will tell you, well, you know, it's going to, at full maturity, it's going to grow to, 4 feet and 5 feet tall. That's because most of us want a compact plant, but the reality is different. If you go to Portland Nursery, you will see that they'll say that plant's going to grow to, in optimum conditions, is going to go to 12 feet tall and probably 5 to 6 feet wide. So do your homework. Don't just look at the tag. Before you buy, look it up. But as far as the light goes, they're pretty accurate on those. So full sun, whether it means gardening or shrubs or trees that you have, is a minimum of 6 hours. Light shade is 3 and 5 hours of direct summer sun, usually in the morning because it's not quite as hot. Partial is just 2 hours of sun and the shaded pretty much for the rest of the day. Azaleas, rhododendrons, and the puffball hydrangeas should be in the shade for part of the day. And that is a big problem we have here. Almost everybody I know grows azaleas, rhododendrons, and hydrangeas in full sun, and they end up with scalded leaves and diseases and insects because of it. They're not growing where they're supposed to be. Now, full shade is less than an hour of direct sunlight, but they do get some dappled sun, and deep shade is what you have underneath your deck where it's not seen the light of day in a long time. The trick is looking at the tag where it says part shade to full shade. So which is it? Look at the first word. That's the optimum. So if it said full sun to part shade, full sun would be optimal. So it's the first word on that. Now, for soil drainage, what kind of soil do you have? Sandy soil drains really quickly, and that's okay if you have plants that are drought resistant. Most of us have clay soil or some other combination, and because it drains slowly, it can cause root rot diseases. And a percolation test will tell you how fast your soil drains. I wanted to show you this. This is in West Longview. This is one of the sloughs or the canals behind these houses. We got a call about 5 years ago. A lady and her husband were growing some beautiful specimen trees. I mean, absolutely gorgeous trees that you would find in an arboretum. They were lovely, or had been. They were calling us because all of their trees were dying, and they must have had 50 trees. And she said they had done all the drainage that they could. They had French drains in, and everything they knew what to do to make the soil drain well. We pulled up in front of their house, and we could see water pouring out of those drainage holes into the street, just pouring like somebody was running a pump through it. And I wasn't aware where we were, and because you couldn't see anything from the house, and I'm not familiar with this section of Longview. So we're walking, we walked over there, we took a step onto the grass to go look at the first tree, and I was wet up to the top of my shoe. Her whole yard was like that because it was March, and it had been raining all winter, and they backed up on the canal. The only trees in that yard that weren't dying were ones where they had made raised, like 6-foot raised beds of mounds of soil and planted the trees in those. That's one way you can get around having waterlogged soil. If you make a mound and plant on the mound, get it above the regular soil level, the soil will drain well enough that your plant can live. So I'm not sure what they did after we left. We told them that the plants weren't dying because of a disease, but because their roots were drowning. So we've already talked about this at a different presentation we've had, but one way to check soil drainage is to do a perk test. And basically all you're checking is to see how well your soil drains. If you dig a hole and fill it with water, let it drain, then come back and refill it with water, and then measure how long it takes to drain. Ideally, it should drain about 2 inches an hour. Poor drainage is less than 1 inch an hour. And if it drains too fast, more than 4 inches of water, then you choose drought-tolerant plants. This will give you a pretty good idea of what you've got, and you can either take several years to amend your drainage, or, like I said before, plant on mounds, or just go with what you have and know what you need to go with. Know what kind of plants for what kind of soil. If they are plants that are tolerant of having wet roots, then you're in good shape. Disease resistant, deer resistant. I don't know about you, but I've bought deer resistant plants before, and it does not mean deer proof. I've got a hydrangea in my yard that is deer resistant, and I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many times they prune the top of that off. And I've got some sedum in my yard too that's supposed to be deer proof. Somebody told me that. I should know better. And we had a mama bring her babies there one time, and I looked out the window, and there was Mama and both of her little ones with our sedum hanging out of their mouths like beards. They were tickled pink that we provided that for them. I want to show you a place. It's PNW Plants. It's a WSU site. you can go in and look for any kind of a tree that you want. Let's say I want it partial shade. I want it suitable to a small lot. I don't care if it's the fruit's showy or edible. I'd like good fall color. And maybe a deciduous tree. Let's say a deciduous tree under 25 feet. And I'm going to click search. And it's going to give me a list of trees that would work there. And again, yeah, it's pretty cool. You don't need to copy any of this down because it's going to be available on our website. And you can click all the links there. But it's a wonderful, wonderful place to be able to research what you want. You can put in any combination of criteria for yourself. Take your phone to the nursery with you. And when you look at a plant that you possibly haven't checked out before, they have something that you weren't sure that you'd like. You didn't know that you'd like it. Read about it on the phone to make sure that it doesn't have problems where you want to plant it. Now, we're in hardiness zone 8. Most of us are, 8, 8B. But elevation matters around here, especially because I'm at 1,000 feet. My son can grow things at 26 feet above sea level down in Kalama that won't grow up here. The hardiness zones are based only on average minimum temperatures and don't take into consideration a lot of other factors like day length. You know, we get shadows from mountain ranges, so our sun effectively goes down before other people's, at least where I live, because we face the Oregon side from Kalama. We have more rainfall than a lot of places that are still 8B. A lot of us have frost pockets, places in our yard where it gets frost no matter what. It's just the way that it settles. Minimum and maximum temperatures, that's the most important. They take average temperatures. And when I first moved here, I bought a Hebe because I love those things. They're just beautiful. And we were at 1,500 feet. What did I know? And it said it was okay for zone 8, and I planted it. It did okay the first winter. Second year, it died. One of my neighbors in the same neighborhood told me that when she buys plants, she tries to buy plants that are 5 and 6, zones 5 and 6, because we do get such deep freezes up here. So take into consideration where you live before you believe the hardiness zone. Did you know that Longview, Washington, and Dallas, Texas have the same hardiness zone? I mean, it's just bizarre, isn't it? They don't have anything like the same kind of summer weather we do. They don't have the winter weather we do, and yet they're all zone 8B. So we know where we live. We have to pay attention to that. Okay, so let's move on. How much space is available? Are there overhead utility wires? I think we've all seen this. And they always tell us to call before you dig so that you don't hit anything underground. Are the roots going to affect sidewalks or driveways? And they will do this. Those roots are pretty strong. You have to watch for compacted soil. Is there going to be a lot of foot traffic? Do people drive over that area? If they do, especially with clay soil, it's going to compact that soil even more so that there will be no oxygen to the roots. When I worked at a university back in Ohio, and they had done all kinds of new landscaping, and they put these little footpaths in with little blocks for the students to walk on to get to their classes. Well, they weren't thinking. It looked pretty, but that isn't. The students wanted to get from point A to point B as quickly as they could, so they would cut right across it. And in retrospect, whoever did the landscaping on that should have tried to see where students walked and then put the pathways and then planted the trees around it, because even foot traffic can impact the root health and the compaction of the soil. And sight lines. And this is really important up here in the hills where people buy property because they want to be able to see the river. or the mountain, whatever, is it going to eventually block your view or your neighbors? I can't tell you how many times we've had people that are living downhill from the people uphill saying, I think somebody poisoned my tree because they don't like that tree there. They've come over several times and have asked me to cut it down so they can see, and I think they've poisoned our tree. That's not something we do, but we get that a lot. We get questions like that a lot. And this is what can happen when people walk across the soil. You see, pathways are formed because of compacted soil. So you want to make sure that you're planting where there's not going to be a lot of foot traffic. Do you have hot spots in your yard? This was taken, I'm not sure you can tell a whole lot, but this fellow's plants all wilted during that really hot weather we had in May. And everything else in the yard was fine, and he was concerned that he had some kind of a disease on his plants. Well, it was inside next to the fence there, and the hot south sun just fried those plants. It was just too warm for them. Now, you can use that to your advantage. I've got a lemon cypress tree, which really, I think it's like 8B or something like that. I shouldn't be able to grow it up here, but I've got it in a pot, and in the wintertime, I move it back to an area on concrete next to my building, and what little sun we have warms up the concrete and the wall behind it and keeps that plant warm and safe all winter long. So you can use these hot spots to your advantage too. You should consider maintenance issues. My daughter's neighbor has a ginkgo tree, and it's a female ginkgo tree. Male ginkgo trees have beautiful leaves. They're ancient plants, but the females have the nastiest smelling fruit that you've ever wanted to have, and most of it falls in my daughter's yard. She's not happy. Crabapple trees will do the same thing. They're really pretty when they're in bloom, and the apples are pretty on the tree, but when they fall, it's a mess, and sometimes a dangerous mess if you slip on them. So why do you want that tree there? To make it pretty? Do you want it as a windbreak? Do you want it for shade or as a fence? Or do you want it because it's an edible or because it attracts pollinators? Read all about it. Again, go to that PNW Plants site that I told you about. You'll be able to find exactly what you want. This is a master gardener's home. She contacted us. She says, is there anything I can do? My friendly neighbor cut this away from the fence. And, it's on his side of the fence too. And I guess he figured that he didn't like it growing there, so he clipped it. And you're just asking for trouble if you don't plan ahead. Make sure that you consider how big that tree is going to get. And look at the mature height, width, and planting distance that the stated plant instructions are. Measure it carefully and draw sketches of the area that you wanted in your yard. And again, like I told you before, don't believe the plant tag. Do your homework. So here are some common mistakes besides, putting too many plants putting plants in the wrong spot, putting too many plants together, too close together. Now, this kind of looks cute now, doesn't it? Can you imagine what that's going to look like in 15 years? You're not going to even be able to see the house. Underestimating the plant's mature height and width. Installing one type of plant in a row. Now, I know a lot of us grow the arborvitae as a fencing, but when you've only got one kind of plant, if you've got a disease problem, it's going to either wipe out all of them or it's going to wipe out part of them, and it's still going to look terrible. You would probably be better off growing a clump of different kinds of tall, thin trees to create a screen rather than just the one. You don't want to plant a bully plant, one of those that is known in our area to take over. And this azalea, as much as I love azaleas, they are problem plants in our area. This is an azalea. It turns kind of silvery, kind of bleached out leaves. I'll bet you some of you have seen that in your yard. It's not supposed to look like this. It's supposed to have nice green leaves like this. This was planted in full sun next to a fence where the sun is very bright. It makes it even hotter than it normally is. And this plant is infested with lace bugs. And if you don't look at the underside of the leaves, you'd never know there was anything there. Come the next spring, the eggs overwinter underneath the leaves. But next spring, chances are, if the tree hasn't been too damaged, you'll get nice new growth. It'll be green. It'll be really pretty. But once the lace bugs hatch and they start sucking the juice out of the plants, this is what happens. One of our master gardeners who's here, Anne, decided she just was going to take her azaleas out because the problem was just too much. And once it takes hold of a plant, it's very, very difficult to treat. So what do you look for, actually, once you've decided on the plant that you want and you're going to the nursery? You've got to go and be very careful about what you choose. You want to choose something that has a good structure. This tree does not have a good structure. The angle here is too acute. All it would take would be one good windstorm, and it would split the tree right down the middle, causing a problem to your house, your neighbor's house, possibly overhead lines. So make sure the tree has good form, and we'll talk about that. Single tree, stem tree should have one main trunk, and if it doesn't, you can make a pruning cut that will remove that other one, and then you grow the other branch up as the main one. You should have evenly distributed, healthy foliage. It should be all the same color. If you've got kind of light green leaves someplace and white green and then bright green, there may be a problem somewhere. Check it over. Make sure there's no spots on the leaves, no obvious insect damage. And when a tree is small, when it's young or a shrub, if there is damage to the trunk at all, don't buy it, because that can really impact a tree. When the tree's older, it can take a bit of damage to the trunk without much harm to the tree, but not when it's young like that. And it should have a nice, strong trunk. It should be tapered, wider at the top, and get narrowed down to the bottom. And there should be a flare, a slight flare like this, as it goes into the soil. If you see a tree that goes straight down into the ground, chances are it's planted too deep. So this is what you should be looking for. These trees aren't good. Not straight, not good. This one is one of those acute angles. Both of those are. You could probably take this branch off and let this be the leader. Now what you're looking for is a tree that is straight. And if you look down at the top of it, it would look like the spokes of a wheel. You should have branches coming off all the way around the tree. These are kind of sparse. The bigger branches are coming off at different angles, but this is what you want. The big thing that you want to look for is healthy roots. You're allowed to pull the plant gently out of the pot. And we're talking now about containerized plants because, I mean, we have balled and burlap bags here, but for the most part, when we go to a nursery, we get the ones that are in a plastic container. These are circling roots. You can cut these off, or my personal preference is don't buy them. There are other ones there. Try to avoid the circling roots because they will go around and around the tree, not out into the soil where they anchor it, and they can grow around the trunk of the tree and eventually cut off its circulation and kill it. If you have a grafted tree, and you can see here what circling roots look like. They're coming up around. Those should be cut off. And this is what a girdling root looks like. Do you see how it's growing into the base of that tree? Eventually, it will kill the tree, or at least kill this half of it. So for grafted trees, if you see suckers coming off out of the rootstock, I mean, don't get it, or make sure you cut it off if you do see that, because that's you don't want that tree. You didn't buy whatever tree that is because of what the rootstock is other than it's healthy. You bought it because you want what's above the graft, so cut that off. And it should be a nice, solid, moist root ball. So, like I said, we've got containerized plants. Balled and burlap are something we don't usually get around here unless you buy it from a landscaper. And the problem with balled and burlap bags, they have harvested those. They have taken most of the roots, so they have a very damaged root system and not very much of it compared to the size of the tree. So they require very, very careful handling. Bare root we're not going to cover because usually the bare root fruit trees and things like that we plant in springtime, and that's a completely different way of planting. But when you're transporting your plant, make sure that you always use the container. Don't drag it around by the trunk. And eventually you're going to be removing all the wires, tags, trunk, and the trunk wraps that came with it. So, and don't be afraid of hurting your tree once you bring it home. Find the main root system. It's usually not in the first couple inches of soil. You want to go in there. If you put a screwdriver in, you can kind of feel where those roots start, and you can kind of pick the soil away from around there so that you expose the top of those. If you don't do that, you're going to be planting this too deep, no matter what you do, because you'll think that this is the top, and it's not. The top is actually where the roots go into the soil. So once you've taken off the top here and you see where the roots are, you want to measure the width and the depth of the plant. You'll be wanting to cut off any of the circling roots, like that. If that one came out there, you would chop it off here. Sometimes, I'll show you on another picture, the roots, if they're in containers, they'll kind of tilt down, but you want to cut where it makes the turn. The most important thing is you want a saucer-shaped hole rather than just a big, deep hole in the ground. You don't want to put a $100 tree in a $10 hole. You want the tree to be in a hole that is shallow but very wide. You want it to be the depth of the planting hole is the depth of your plant, and you want it to be 2 to 3 times as wide as the root ball. But before you plant, especially the containerized plants, this is what they usually look like, isn't it? Especially if you buy them at the end of the year. What they say to do with those is look and make sure that there are no circling roots, but I'll show you that in a minute. We need to get rid of those. There are a couple different ways to do it. You can either spread them apart with your fingers or maybe put it in a little bit of water and make sure that those roots are coming out instead of wrapped around like that. You want them to go out into the soil. If there are too many, and that, to me that looks like it's too many, you can cut off an inch all the way around here and off the bottom. And what that does is it frees up the rest of those roots to move freely out into the soil. And actually, research has been done. The plants do a lot better if you take them off, if you cut off the outer inch all the way around. This is what you would do with these. They took this out of the container for illustration purposes, but you can see that these roots are coming out and they dive down. And you don't want that because they're probably diving down and coming up under because they've been in a container for too long. Cut them here. Better yet, don't buy that plant. If you dig down with your fingers in the pot at the nursery or have somebody help you slide it out of the container, you can see a lot of the abnormalities that you might otherwise not see if you just picked a pretty tree and brought it home. So look at this. Look at all those circling roots. They decided that they could probably bring this home. This one could be particularly bad. You can see it's all winding all the way around there. And this is what it looks like after. They trimmed away all those roots. They trimmed away this one. And this is what they have. they've got all the roots that are coming down out into the soil, and that tree has a chance for a healthy start. And this is just for illustrative purposes. You want the roots to be able to come out. This is after they've chopped off about an inch around, and then they've taken their fingers in and pulled out around so that the roots are headed in the right direction. So we, as we said, dig the hole only as deep as the root system, but no deeper. 2 to 3 times wider than the size of the trunk. And if you've got a balled burlap bag, if you do have one, you have to handle it very, very carefully because you really don't want to disturb these roots. Like I said, they don't have much in the way of roots, not enough to support the plant the way it is, so you don't want to disturb the root ball if you can help it. Once it's in the hole, you can cut the wire or at least peel it back and cut it, and same with the burlap. You can leave. If you can get the burlap out the bottom by kind of tilting the tree this way and that way without disturbing the soil too much, with the root ball, too much, remove the burlap. The rest of the wire won't matter because the roots can go through the wire. If you do disturb the roots, make sure that you backfill with soil pretty carefully there to stabilize it. So, a lot of people used to, and my husband still likes to, although I've told him not to, you backfill only with the same soil you took out. Don't amend it. Don't put fertilizer in it. Don't put mulch in it, or don't put compost in it. Don't put anything in there but the soil you took out of it and water. And as you put it in, you want to put in, several inches and then water it down so that all the air gets out of there. Tamp it down gently with your hands. Don't pack it, but tamp it. And just keep doing that until the hole is filled up. When you're done, mulch it. You want to put in 2 to 4 inches of mulch over the backfilled area, but don't volcano mulch. It should never touch the trunk of the tree because that'll encourage roots to grow out, which will probably encircle it, girdle it, and kill it. And we're almost done. We're rounding the curve here. Staking the tree is usually not necessary. Sometimes young trees can't stand on their own, or they're so flimsy that in the wind they just blow everywhere. If the root ball is unstable, you want to stabilize it down low. If the tree is kind of slender and is blowing in the wind, you want to stabilize it up a little bit higher, but you want to use something wide and loose, and you need to remove the stake after 2 years, at the latest, 1 year preferably. Make sure that you water. Every other day for fast draining soils, all others check weekly. If it's on a hill, you've got to watch that too. How often to do it? Check the soil at 6 inches. If it's dry, you need about 1.5 gallons per diameter inch of trunk. If you mulch the tree, you're going to have a lot less water loss, and that will help too. What I was going to say there. One problem we see a lot in the springtime is cracked trunks. If your tree has a south exposure and the sun is hitting, especially young trees with dark bark, you can end up with a split from the change of temperatures from the hot sun during the day to the freezing temperatures at night. If you paint the tree with a combination of, a mixture of water, half water and half interior latex paint, kind of whitewash it, it'll help to reflect the sun and should prevent the tree from the trunk from splitting like that. When it's split, a lot of times it doesn't do any damage, but it opens it up to disease and insects, and you don't want that. So we are at the end, and we're going to come at it from a different angle. These are the top tree planting mistakes. Poor selection, or inadequate root system, or one that's pot bound or has girdling roots, a bad planting site, maybe poor drainage, the planting hole is too small, usually it's too deep and not wide enough, planting it too deep. That is the biggest problem when you're planting. People want to plant them too deep. They should be only as deep as the roots, and that's from the 2 inches that you took off so that you can see the roots on the top down to the bottom. If you don't mulch, you're going to have problems. If I don't like this, not staked. If it's improperly staked, chances are your tree does not need to be staked. If you don't water it or water it improperly, one of the big problems we see here in summertime is people don't water their big trees. Trees in our area anymore, I guess it didn't used to be that way. With the drought we have in summer, even the large landscape trees need water at least once a month. And if you don't keep an eye on your plants on an ongoing basis and catch problems early, you'll end up with a lot more problems than you would as if you were checking them all along. As soon as I'm done here, I'm going to put this up on our website, and you'll be able to click on all these different places. That P&W Plants is the one that I showed you. That is the best. You can go in and look for ground covers. Great Plant Picks is another really good place. It's all the plants for the P&W that growers have decided have been the best plants that they have seen. Landscaping drain fields has always been a question where we live. Plants for erosion control and on hillsides. This will give you all the information that you need. Drought tolerant, WSU has a really good one for ornamental trees in narrow spaces. So you have these tall, skinny trees, smaller trees for the home landscape that aren't going to hit your phone lines or outgrow the space that you put it in. These are all really good resources. And then different ways to plant your different handouts for planting a tree and taking care of it.